Hi guys, so I made a video on why we were leaving Seattle. It was pretty clear that basically by all measures of quality of life it was getting pretty bad, and the reasons we'd moved there for things like walking to work and stuff like that were no longer relevant under working from home conditions. So we decided to go to Vegas. I had a lot of people ask why'd we choose Vegas. So there are quite a few criteria that sort of shortlisted a lot of things. The biggest one being it had to be a 0% income tax state. That was sort of just an easy one, like if you don't have to pay tax, why would you? Hopefully the weather would be better, and we had to get a lot for our lifestyle and that sort of thing. And so while there are options within Washington state, we thought if you're going to make a move, make it big. And that quickly whittles it down to Las Vegas. There's a few other states obviously have 0% tax, but they're also in a different time zone, which might make working from home a little bit more complicated. It wasn't something we wanted to introduce just yet. And we'd also spent more time in Las Vegas than any other city outside of Washington state. So that was also a very big factor. Now, going into some of the details, first up is weather. We wanted a place that was better than Seattle, so it's not a huge upstep in criteria. Now, Seattle isn't really the worst. It might be the worst, but it's pretty tolerable. Certainly, we found it reasonably okay. I come from Melbourne, Australia, which has a lot of rain days, so does Seattle. But obviously, Las Vegas in the desert, it's dry all year round. And I think as an adult, that's, you can deal with a drizzly sort of environment as well as a dry environment pretty well. But I also have a child, and children just don't give the being wet enough respect. So it's harder to keep them dry. And so avoiding rainy climates is a huge plus for kids and being able to get outside with them. The other aspect was in Seattle, there's like 3 months of the year in winter where you sort of kind of write off going outside. It gets a little too cold and it's a little too wet at the same time. While here, I thought the 3 months I'd have to write off would be summer. And that's just because it just seems like the temperatures are too high, and really what you want to be doing is going from one air-conditioned environment to the next very quickly. And that is true during the day, but the big surprise for us was just how much activity you can get up to once the sun sets. And there's basically families out in the parks after dark, and they're all lit up so that you can actually still enjoy sports and playground stuff like that. And we even did things like dining outside al fresco and inviting some friends over and things like that. So these are things that I wouldn't have entertained before, and was a huge surprise. So summer really isn't the write-off that you would expect. We also quickly got a pretty good idea of where we'd want to move to. So in Las Vegas, it's this weird sort of thing where you have the Strip, which everyone knows. Immediately outside the Strip, like 1 block away, it's sort of like a hell. And the further you move away from the Strip, the better things are generally, except for North Las Vegas, quote unquote, near the Air Force Base, I think is where they're talking about. They're not talking all the way up north on the perimeter, which is like Aliante. That's actually nice again. But basically, the further away you get from the Strip and towards the outskirts of Las Vegas, the better it is. And the two key communities at the high end there, and it's still middle class, and I'll talk about that, is Summerlin and Henderson. Summerlin being on the west side of Las Vegas and Henderson being on the southeast. So Seattle is a city that was sort of organically built. It's very walkable, it's pretty compact by its nature, being surrounded by water and things like that. So it makes traffic kind of hellish. Everything's kind of hodgepodge and high density. And while you can get around public transport pretty well, then once you start getting into a car, the traffic levels are pretty high, and it's pretty rough. And then when you're talking about the dynamic in the city, you're talking about very expensive luxury apartments, and then downstairs there'll be like a homeless person sleeping at your door, blocking your way in and out of your apartment or something like that. So there's this no separation at all, and I'm not trying to make a wider social commentary here. In the past I would have said that having a mix of society is important, and but I'm not going to make a comment here. But basically, there's no amount of money if you live in Seattle that'll prevent you from basically smelling a homeless person's feces and urine wherever you go. In Las Vegas, talking about Summerlin, and probably the experience is true for Henderson as well, that these communities that are built here are built from the ground up. Like, there's nothing organic about it at all. They've done their very best to try and cater for the middle class. And living here, I realize exactly what the middle class means here in America. And it obviously means a lot of mass-produced, designed for everyone type thing, to the craziest extent that I've never seen it before. And basically, in given communities, there'll only be like 3 or 4 different houses. And by that I mean every third house is literally a carbon copy of the house that's just across from it. And everyone's effectively living the same life, quote unquote. It's just crazy to think that within this community here, that I have the exact same house plan as 1/3 of all the other people here. And I've just never seen that before. I'm sure it's not uncommon in other parts, but it just blows me away. It just speaks to, like, they're able to predict exactly who's going to live here, the types of families that are going to live here, their sort of income level, and that's what the middle class is about. It's about being able to cater for a large number of people very well. You know, that hopefully the bulk of your society is in the middle class and everyone can live well. And that's what it feels like here. It feels like everyone is enjoying their life. They're not the uber rich, but they're not poor either, and everything is just hunky-dory. The amount of crime and issues here, it's just very low. So in the 3 months I've been here, the biggest pest has been the new HOA saying that I had to have the palm trees trimmed, and I know nothing about palm trees, so this put me into a wild tizzy of confusion. But that's sort of like the level of problem here versus Seattle, where I was talking about someone crossing my path and she had a sword in her hand, looking crazy and stuff like that. That just doesn't happen here. So in these master plan communities, they have a really great mix of areas that you can live like this, and it's all residential. But then right next to it, like on almost every corner, there's a mall. So strip malls are the thing here. And there's lots of dining options and entertainment. Red Rock Casino is like 5 minutes away. 8 minutes away is Costco. Downtown Summerlin is over there. So I'm getting more options than I did in Seattle. Even though Seattle is walkable and there's stuff physically in proximity, there's just more options here. Now, yes, you do have to use a car, and that's just a reality here. That's like designed for the middle class. There's many communities here that just simply don't have footpaths. Like, the only way to get in and out of them is a car. And that sounds like, how could you possibly cater for like the low end there? Well, you can't. The communities are designed for the middle class, and that's what I'm saying. It's like, you know your audience and you go with it. You don't fight it, basically. You don't try to be the odd one out. It's basically a story of it's hip to be a square, and there's lots of dining options. They're all very affordable, and it's been a really good experience here with all of the restaurants basically being open. They are at a slightly limited capacity because they have the 6 feet rule of the COVID stuff, but other than that, my wife and I have basically been going to for lunch and dinner, eating out almost every single day, and it's been a lot of fun. Now, a city run by car, that sounds like a danger zone. Like, what's traffic like? And as far as I can tell, there is no traffic. Many times a day, I'm just the only person on the road, and this could be almost any time of the day. It feels like there's no rush hour. In addition to, you know, dining and going out, stuff like that, I play a lot of golf. And there's like plenty of golf courses around, and they're significantly cheaper than Seattle, and I don't have to play them in the rain. My wife likes the courses a lot because most of them are designed around using a cart, so the carts are usually free and included as part of the round of golf, while in Seattle they'd be like an extra $30 for a pair. So that's a really big improvement for my wife. I personally would prefer courses that you could walk around, but I'm not going to gripe about it. The golf course quality is very good. The conditions are generally much better in general, especially if you factor in trying to play all year round, and it's been fantastic for that. The other outdoor activities we've been getting into is like hiking. We didn't used to do it before. We mostly focus our activities around golf basically, or shooting, but now that we have a kid, he can't play golf, so an easy thing for me to do is to throw him in his sort of like kid backpack and go around hiking. And at the moment we're going through all the hiking trails in Red Rock recreational area. It's very accessible, like you don't need a four-wheel drive or anything like that, and they've got parking areas. It's a little, most locals don't go there because you need to pay like $16 per entry, or you need to pay for an annual pass, and there's a lot of other options that you go to do your hiking that don't require that entry fee. But for us, you know, we've already paid for that annual, and it allows us to go there in a relatively, you know, car that isn't ready to go out into like trails and stuff like that. So we've just got you know, a minivan, so it's not doing any serious off-roading or any kind of off-roading to be able to get to a trailhead. So it works out for us for now. That being said, the wider outdoor areas, there's basically very little private land in Nevada, well, compared to other states at least. And so a lot of the land is publicly owned, meaning access to it is very, very high. In Washington State, there's a lot of nature and stuff like that, but there's so many pockets of private land, or it's forestry or agricultural, or people own it. Access to land is actually quite difficult on the western side of Washington. And so, and also a lot of Indian reservations as well. Here, it just seems it's so much easier to get out and go in any direction, and you're going to find public land and trails and stuff like that. So I've been strongly considering getting something very capable of four-wheel drive, and basically, you know, camping out there and things like that. So that really interests me, including the hunting opportunities. So you go towards the base of mountains and stuff like that. So Las Vegas is Las Vegas Valley, so it's surrounded by mountains. It's quite beautiful. And so I'm hoping that might be a possibility next year. And so I'm probably thinking about getting a truck soon to be able to support those extra outdoor activities. As for all the shooting sports, I was under the impression that Las Vegas was a very good area for the shooting sports, and my impression so far has not been that great actually. There are a lot of shooting sports going on. However, you know, my game is USPSA, and just on the USPSA front, there's only 2 matches a month, and they're actually held at the same range each month. I've been going to one by Silver State Practical Shooters. Next week, hopefully, I'm going to the one organised by Tropang, and now they're at the same range, so I really don't know what the difference in setup and quality is going to be like. But so far, that's a big step down from having basically 5 different USPSA matches a month in Western Washington, which is pretty good. Also, the quality of competition so far from what I've seen, and it might be just because it's winter month or something, I don't know, hasn't been as high as it is in Western Washington. And like, to put that in perspective though, Western Washington, you know, I got to shoot a couple times alongside Christian Saylor, who's the 2-time national champion and Grand Slam winner of all of the area competitions in USPSA and USA, obviously. So, you know, there's a pretty high level standard of competition out there, and that's that drives a lot of the quality and some of the fun of the sport. So I'm thinking of expanding my options by shooting more sports than just USPSA. IDPA is out here at 2 different clubs, 2 times a month, but they both have their varying levels of fuddiness going on. On one level, there's one that's up at Clark County, and they don't allow PCC, and they say IDPA should never have PCCs. And so with that, I'm out. Like, I don't need to participate. If you don't want me, I don't need that either. I don't need to come. The other one, they do allow PCCs at Desert Sportsman's. Seems like a really fun crew, but they put all the stages so that the PCC is forced to do a reload that the other divisions are not forced to do a reload. Like, yes, their division capacity is lower, but they're basically specifically going out of their way to cripple PCC, which I really, it puts a bad taste in my mouth, and I don't really see why they're doing that. If they think that they're going to develop some sort of parity between PCC and the handguns, well, there's a lot of things you can do with stage design, and in general, IDPA is pretty unforgiving for PCC anyway, so they really didn't need to do that. But anyway, so there's good options. You can shoot every single day. There's Silver State Shoots puts on basically a shooting sport every single weekend day. So you can shoot the competitions a lot, but it just won't necessarily be the sort of the high caliber club matches that were happening out in Western Washington. As for recreational shooting, the Clark County has sort of very old school setup for ranges. I don't think they have bays that you can just go there and use. I'll have to inquire about that. Desert Sportsman's looks really good, but their membership's completely closed, so it's not an option for anyone moving here, including myself. And they don't have their equipment available for people to use. So they've got the bays ready to use, but you can't get the target stands and the walls to be able to practice with those. So you'd have to bring your own, which is quite onerous, considering you're already paying for the range and stuff like that. Pro Gun Club also is an option down near Boulder City, Henderson area type thing. Their membership's open, however, I figure it's pretty far from where I live, about over an hour, but just under an hour, sorry. But because they're always shooting a competition on the weekend, the opportunity to have a practice session there is limited by the fact that the bays are going to be used for those sorts of things. Now, I have a lot of other bays, but I'll investigate a little bit further. But I'm just saying, like, your options aren't as open as I thought they would be until you start investigating what you can do out in the desert. But to do that, I'm really going to need a 4-wheel drive, so I really don't have that option yet. But certainly, from what I've seen of going out there, doing long range shooting is something that should be easily accessible within like 50 minutes of driving out there, and getting like 1,000+ yard ranges would be just no problem at all. There's just so much open land out there that won't be a problem. While in Western Washington, I really don't know where you can do long range shooting at all, like even beyond 200 yards. There's just too much elevation changes, too much private land, too little public land, and just the forests are really dense over there in Western Washington, so long range shooting just isn't really an option. On safety, things are much better here than in Seattle. I rarely see crazies. They might be walking along the road, but typically not on the outskirts, so where I live, of Las Vegas. And it's just much safer here. The number of people you encounter that are that are concerning is just very low. Now, in terms of gun laws, their CPL requirements are a little bit onerous, so they require you to do an 8-hour course, and with a pretty easy to pass classification, but the actual application, they're allowed to wait 120 days, and my understanding is that they'll use most of that 120 days to get you your license. So moving here, you need your driver's license, and with the DMV all shut and stuff like that, getting your driver's license could take many months. It certainly took me 3 months. And then the application for the CPL, as I said, that could take 3-4 months. So you're looking at like 6 or 7 months before you can legally conceal carry. So that's kind of shocking. That being said, there's limited situations where you might want to conceal carry. I would say, obviously, the Strip is an area that isn't particularly, safe compared to the other areas. It's not bad, but if you're going there with a certain amount, like just say you're wearing your wife's wearing jewelry and you're going out at night or something like that, you may want to have some better protection on you or something like that. So it's reasonable, and there's drunk people out there who might do something that they wouldn't otherwise do. So having your options is something you'd want while on and around the Strip. I'm glad to say that on other gun laws that there isn't a semi-automatic extra regulations here around that, but they do have red flag laws and universal background checks here, which is really, really disappointing. When I moved, I had a few handguns that I would have liked to have sold, but I thought I'll just wait till I go to Las Vegas. It'll be much easier. Hopefully, the private party sales will be easier. And basically, no. Now, it is easy in some respects. So I think if you're an American citizen, you should have no trouble passing a NICS background check instantly, and there's no extra stages. While in Seattle, there's now extra stages for both handguns and semi-automatic rifles. That would mean that it's always a 10-day wait. So there's still some upside here, but it's also very clear that this is a state that is basically trailing Washington State by about 2 to 3 years, and that's not good at all. I really, really hope that all the recent events get people to realize that guns are an important right for people to have. So to wrap up, are there better places in Las Vegas? Well, you might not have the same criteria. Even I realize like the zero income tax thing is, unless you're earning a really, really high amount of money, it may not be one of the things that you should like really focus on too heavily. Like I see Arizona's like 4.5% even at the top tax bracket. You'd have to be earning a lot of money before that would even reach like $20,000 of taxes. But once you start talking about those numbers, you're like, well, that would pay for all of the rent for the year or something like that. So it is an important factor, something that a lot of people should work out, but it probably shouldn't be the hard criteria like we'd set, where we'd say it's like, it's not zero, we're not going. It's worth working out how much taxes you would be paying and seeing whether or not, say, your rent and cost of living would work out better or not better based on what you're comparing to. That being said, Las Vegas is pretty cheap. Both cost of living and the taxes is pretty cheap. So it'd be hard to imagine beating Las Vegas in that respect. And value for money on rent's pretty good. We are thinking about doing a few scouting holidays, so to Texas, Tennessee, Florida. These are other places that sort of fit criteria except for the time zone aspect, but maybe they offer better quality of life outside of just the time zone thing. And maybe the time zone thing is something that we can work on with work and things like that, if it's worth doing, if we see that there's clearly a lot of benefit. I'm 80% sure that we'll be settling down here for the foreseeable future, but I'm completely open, especially if for some reason, as this place gets more and more blue, unfortunately, if it becomes intolerable like Seattle somehow very quickly. Anyway, here's hoping I haven't just gone from one fire to the next. See you around.